Oh, yeah. I will call this meeting to order. It's the regular meeting of the Transportation and Public Works Committee. We are joined by a quorum of council members. I'm Councilmember Reich. I will be chairing the committee. I'm joined by council members Gordon, Yang, Glidden. We are a quorum and we can conduct the committee's business. I'm sure we'll be joined by other council members as we proceed. We have an addition to the agenda where it says adjournment, and prior to the adjournment action for this evening's meeting, there will be a brief overview given by Director Kotke. So we have 18, a total of 16 items and the adjournment motion before us on the agenda. All those who wish to approve the agenda say aye. Dissenting nay. That carries. I will now go through the consent items on the agenda. Any member can pull them for discussion or questioning. They are as follows. Item 3 is the ordinance amendment, set a public hearing for July 22nd, 2014, to consider an ordinance amending Title 11, Chapter 225 of the Metropolitan or Minneapolis Code of Ordinances relating to health and sanitation, garbage, refuse, expanding the authority of the Department of Works Division and recycling to provide a cleanup and charge excessive solid waste at residential properties with more than 4 dwelling units and non-residential properties in the city of Minneapolis. Item 4 is a special boulevard permit, nice ride permit. Approve a special boulevard permit application for the corner of 11th Avenue South and 2nd Street at Gold Medal Park. Item 5 is the special boulevard permit, Mill Quarter Ramp. To approve the permit application at 711 2nd Avenue South. Item 6 is the sodium hydroxide feed and storage system construction. Authorize an increase in the contract to Municipal Builders Incorporated at $65,000 for a revised contract total $1,335,700 to allow for a change order number 1 in the construction of the sodium hydroxide feed and storage system at the Fridley Filtration Plant. No additional appropriation is required. 7 is the Central Avenue Detour Agreement with MnDOT. Authorize execution of Trunk Highway number 65 Detour Agreement with the Minnesota Department of Transportation to establish a detour route on Johnson Street during the proposed Central Avenue construction. This will be referred to the Ways and Means Committee. Item 8 is the Nicollet Central Modern Streetcar Project. Authorize execution of a contract with Zan Associates to provide project management and public outreach professional services for the Nicollet Central Modern Streetcar Project in amount not to exceed $125,000 for a period July 1st, 2014 through June 30th, 2015. This will be referred to the Ways and Means Committee. Item 7 is the 7th Street Ramp Project. Authorize acceptance of the TED grant in amount of $6,790,000. Amend the capital budget to establish a 7th Street Ramp project and increase the amount by the stated dollars in the previous action. Authorize execution of a contract with SRF Consulting Group Incorporated for professional services for project management and community outreach and final design related to the 7th Street Ramp project in the amount of $799,700. And approve the project layout and refer this to Ways and Means Committee. Item 10 is a pass-through sales of excess MnDOT land. Set a public hearing for July 22nd, 2014 to consider the acquisition and disposition of excess Minnesota Department land to the adjacent property owners at 1812 Franklin Avenue Southeast. Item 11 is to authorize execution of a pilot program agreement with Asset Works regarding the use of automatic vehicle location AVL services in the city-owned vehicles, including an agreement to indemnify Asset Works for any breach of property rights. This will be referred to Ways and Means Committee. Item 12 is to approve a resolution supporting the development and implementation of the Orange Line Bus Rapid Transit or BRT service on I-35W from Burnsville downtown to Minneapolis. Item 13 is to accept the low bid of Wetland Habitat Restoration, LLC, for an estimated expenditure of $384,865 for stormwater specialty vegetation management. This will be referred to Ways and Means Committee. I will move all items. Does anyone wish to discuss them? See none. Approving them as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Dissenting nay. The consent items carry. We can now move to the public hearing portion of the agenda, starting with item number 1, which is the public hearing regarding 2014 alley resurfacing program. Director Kotke.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Mike Kennedy, our Director of Transportation Maintenance and Repair, will make this presentation.
Morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Mike Kennedy, Director of Transportation Maintenance and Repair for Minneapolis Public Works. We're here before you for a public hearing on the 2014 alley resurfacing program. On May 23rd, 2014, the City Council designated the alley locations for the improvements to be made. These improvements consist of installing an asphalt overlay on the concrete surface. This work is being done to extend the operational life of concrete alleys and to facilitate local drainage. 13 alleys, as enumerated on the list that is attached to the letter, are located throughout the city, are scheduled to be resurfaced in 2014. The project cost estimate for the entire project is $338,030. The 2014 adopted uniform assessment rate of 6.5 cents per foot will be used for the project cost that's being assessed. The rate has not changed since 2010. The total amount to be assessed is $119,079.15. The remaining costs not covered by assessments would be funded by net debt bonds. Therefore, our recommendation today is to pass a resolution ordering the city engineer to proceed and do the work in adopting special assessments in the amount of $119,079.15 for this program, and pass a resolution requesting the Board of Estimate and Taxation to authorize the city's issuance and sale of assessment bonds in the amount of $119,080, with the bonds to be paid for from special assessments. That's my program, or my presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Any questions for staff regarding the presentation? Seeing none, I will then open the public hearing, and this is a public hearing for the 2014 alley resurfacing program as described in the staff presentation. Is anyone signed in to speak? I will take them in order. Don Swanson, please come to the podium, state your name and address for the record.
Good morning. My name's Don Swanson. I live at 4230 Russell Avenue North. I've lived there since 1948. I know that alley better than anybody on earth. I've been playing there for a long time. I've been talking with different people from different city agencies. One yesterday came out and looked at my situation. It's not that bad in the summer with the rain. It will flood the alley a bit. It's worse on 42nd and Queen because it's downhill a little bit. And on the entrance to my driveway down the alley, the city has a telephone pole that's been there forever. It makes it very difficult for me to turn into my driveway. I consistently get stuck in the winters. I was brought up, my father telling me I have to, when I learn how to drive, I have to approach it from the south side because it's downhill. If you stand in the front yard, in the street, or in the alley, you look north, it's all uphill, dowling pits, as far as you can see. And except for when you get to our corner, if you're hard to explain. As far as, okay, I'm looking south. I'm in my backyard, and it'll come down the alley, and there's one drain there. And from about my house in the middle of the block till that drain, it just goes down a little bit, but the water will run out. I went out there last night in the rain and looked to just double check because of the work that they did on the street a few years ago, which I have pictures of my older brother and me catching fish out there. Actually, that's how bad it gets. And the alley has to be, when they plow it, the alleys are like a little V, like this. Well, that little V is all ice in the winter. I got stuck last winter, just as an example. I was out there for about an hour. Granted, it was a terrible, horrible winter. A lot of ruts, exceptional, but the people across the alley came in and shoved me in. The next morning, it was just hours later, I called the city. Gentleman came out, brought out another plow truck. It got stuck. Brought out another city plow truck after that. It got stuck. Brought out a private contractor's truck. It got stuck. Self-explanatory. This has got to stop. When I am driving in my driveway, here's my driveway, here's a telephone pole right there. Got my fence. I've never seen a car on earth that can do that. I have to have that plowed from my driveway going back here to the alley is down here just a little bit because we used to race little sticks in the alley, okay, until they went a little bit. So there is a little bit of grade from my house going south towards the one drain on the corner of 42nd and Russell. It's just a little teeny bit, but it's enough. The water was running down that drain last night. I need it to be flatter so they can plow, or however they do it. A gentleman that I talked with that was out yesterday came up with, I think, a viable solution. And if you want his name, I've got pictures
not
too,
necessary.
any of that stuff. But it's too much. You know, I'm handicapped. I used to get 75 cents to shovel it. You know, I'd like to have my allowance back, but as long as I'm paying taxes, let's do it right.
Very good. Thank you for your testimony.
Okay? Yeah, that little bit more. In the center of the alley, they have a little, it's a little dip about this big, right smack in the center. I think you all know what I'm talking about, okay? It's about that wide. The other thing too, if you look, which the gentleman did yesterday, you can see when the water runs, where all the gravel, all the sand, all the stuff, it piles up in the middle of the alley. I'm an old school gold prospector, gold miner, okay? It's like in rivers. And it's called the gut, okay? And that's where it's all stacked up. You could take that stuff out of that's in the middle of our alley right now, from there to the corner, shovel it out of the middle, and you could fill up all the holes in the alley, okay?
Sir, I think you ably described the condition, and we may
Pardon
have
me?
it. You ably described the unique condition of your alley, and I think we can allow staff to respond to your comments.
Yeah.
Yep, thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak? Please come forward, state your name and address for the record.
Good morning. My name is Carla Nielsen. I reside at 3932 30th Avenue South. I've been a homeowner of that house for 14 years, but have lived in it for 21. I live in the Badgers First Edition part, and my alley is part of this resurfacing. I question if the entire alley needs to be resurfaced, because the north side of the alley that starts at 3933 29th Avenue, that was resurfaced just a few years ago through former council member Sandy Colvin Roy. We were part of that whole flooded area in the late 90s, so it is perfectly paved with 2 new sewer drains that are midway of the block, from kind of 3933 29th and mine at 3932 30th. Clearly it's asphalted, it's breaking down and all of that, but when I'm also a city employee, and I know we frequently are asked where can the city save dollars. So I kind of am questioning the fiduciary possible responsibility to resurface an entire alley when half of it is in fact very functional and intact, perfect with 2 extra drain ditches to help with the overflow.
Thank you.
And I brought pictures and can send them to Kennedy if needed.
No, we'd appreciate that.
Okay,
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak to this alley resurfacing item? Anyone wish to speak? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and ask staff to comment on the testimony we've had today.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, on the first alley, Mr. Swanson up on Russell, the telephone pole and the geometrics there, that's something that we're not dealing with this project. The winter plowing is something that hopefully, I think he's talking to our district foreman up there, and they can deal with those things in the winter time. This resurfacing project isn't going to address much of that. He did mention the center channel. A portion of that alley years ago had been resurfaced, or I won't say resurfaced because resurface tends to, you think about global, the whole alley, but an asphalt was installed there. In the olden days, when we did, the olden days is 1990s, when we were doing alley resurfacing and overlays, they were actually hand raked in, and we created a channel at the invert of the V shape. We don't do that anymore, And I think that's what he's talking about, is that channel gets filled in with dirt and stuff. And we don't do that anymore. About a decade ago, we mechanized this whole process in order to be much more cost effective and efficient, and we simply kind of create a swale in there now so that there won't be a channel in there. And the whole alley will be done. Hopefully we can get drainage down to the drain that's just down from his home and improve the drainage situation. That's really one of the major functions of this program. So hopefully that will help alleviate some of those issues. The other address, I haven't seen this particular alley. I'd be happy to go take a look at it again. There must be some other issues in the rest of the alley that warrant this work. Maybe trying to get all the drainage in the alley to those drains. I will be happy to take a look at that and contact the resident, and we'll talk about the reasons for doing it.
Good, and I assume staff appreciates not doing redundant work as much as the citizen would as well.
Absolutely.
So we appreciate the intel we gained today, and if those who are here wish to talk more with staff about your particular situations, they're available to do that. So I appreciate that. Thank you. With that, I will move approval of the item before us, as stated by staff in the presentation. All in approval. Oh, Councilmember Yang, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Apologies. Mr. Kennedy, could I just ask a question of you real quick? With regards to the second person that testified, in essence, she was talking about how, let's say, for an alley that might need a partial repair but not the full repair. I mean, are we thinking about doing partial repairs, or, are we of the mindset that, if we're going to do it, we might as well just do the whole thing?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Yang, typically this is what I would refer to as a global repair. We would do the work on the entire alley. Again, I would need to see it. I haven't seen this particular alley myself, but generally speaking, we're looking at not doing a partial overlay, but working the whole alley. So I'd have to understand what's there.
All right, thank you. With that, I move approval. All those in agreement say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. That item carries. We will now move to our second public hearing. Item 2, the LaSalle Avenue Street Reconstruction Project from 12th Street South to 8th Street South. And Director Akaki.
Mr. Chair, Bev Wormka, our project engineer for this project, will make the presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, committee members. This is a public hearing for LaSalle Avenue Reconstruction, project number 2227, the reconstruction between 12th Street South and 8th Street South. Estimated cost to be $4.6 million. This project was designated at the March 28th TPW meeting, and the public hearing actually opened on May 13th. At this point, we're recommending a continuation again of the public hearing to October 21st to allow us time for continued stakeholder discussion and to be able to bring the layout before this committee for approval. And that concludes my presentation.
Any questions for staff? See none, I will open the public hearing. Did anyone sign in to speak? No one has signed in. Does anyone wish to approach to testify? If so, please state your name and address. Final call for the public hearing component. Final call. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and approve the item as stated by staff. All in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. That carries. We now can move to the discussion component of the agenda, item 14 being the first one, the Cedar Avenue Sidewalk Modification Project. Director Kaki.
Mr. Chair, this is kind of a continuance from a previous discussion we had last cycle, and Chris Engelman is our project engineer on this project and will make the presentation.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, committee members. My name is Chris Engelman. I'm the project manager for the Cedar Avenue Sidewalk Modification Project. I give a brief presentation here, but the project is fundamentally a pedestrian zone improvement of the Cedar Avenue corridor extending from 3rd Street South to 7th Street South. That includes scope-wise full removal and replacement of the west side curb, the west and east sidewalks, restriping of the roadway into a 3-lane configuration, pedestrian level lighting, and tree infill. The proposed project is proposed for construction this season, and the cost estimate is approximately $1.7 million. During the previous committee meeting on June 17th, a public hearing was held and closed. At the public hearing, there were 2 questions where additional consideration was undertaken. The first was a request to exempt the northern block from the project scope, basically the block from Riverside to 3rd Street South. The project vision is consistent pedestrian improvement for the entire corridor. This is to improve the transit connection and the pedestrian movement through this commercial environment and node. To maintain this vision, the staff recommends retaining the existing scopes of the project, which is from 3rd Street South to 7th Street South on Cedar Avenue. The second question that was raised was to exclude the Midwest Mountaineering from the proposed resolution regarding conflicting areaways within the project area. The areaway ordinance is a plan for the mutual benefit between the city and property owners to resolve conflicts that may arise from any type of projects for the public good in the area, and address new information as it arises, as it's revealed as we excavate and work in the area. In any situation, city staff will work with the property owners to resolve conflicts as they may arise. It is staff's recommendation to use this areaway management or a method as established by the ordinance and continue forward without the modification to the resolution. That said, the recommendations before the committee today is pass a resolution ordering the city engineer to proceed and to do the work and adopt special assessments in the amount of $148,000 for the Cedar Avenue sidewalk modification project. Pass a resolution requesting the board and estimate and taxation to issue and sell the assessment bonds in the amount of $148,000, and to pass a resolution ordering the city engineer to abandon and remove the areaway located in the public right-of-way that are in conflict with the Cedar Avenue sidewalk modification project. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much. I don't have any questions, but as one of the committee members who, or as the committee member, I guess, who supported the postponement here, I'm very excited to see that this is coming forward. We now feel like we have the funding that we can do this, and it's going to get built this summer or early fall potentially. But I also wanted to let committee members know that I had the opportunity to talk with staff, look at some of the areaway designs, and I'm comfortable that we will be able to preserve the Midwest Mountaineering areaway that we were most concerned about without changing the action at all, and stipulating protecting the areaways, and that this will also give us the authority, should we need it, if we discover some areaways that we aren't aware of at this point, that we can deal and work with those. But I'm confident that the business areaway they were most concerned about will be protected. I also had the opportunity to go look at the sidewalk out there, and could see that there's the panels have shifted. There's many differences, depending on where you actually look and the quality of the sidewalk. And I'm fully comfortable with putting in new sidewalks as planned and not trying to carve out any particular areas. So I will move the staff recommendation.
The staff recommendation has been moved. Any further discussion? Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Engelman, could I ask a few questions of you? Who's the contractor in this situation?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Yang, the project has been bid out. The apparent low bidder is Thomas & Sons. We have not brought forward the request for the acceptance of the bid. It's still going through civil rights review at this time.
Okay. And have we done business with that company before?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Yang, yes, we have. They are actually our contractor for this season's work on 15th and 4th or Riverside Extension, as well as Penn, if I remember correctly. And they've done work for us in the past on other projects.
Okay. I asked because there are some sidewalk projects that are happening in Ward 5, and we've kind of gone through some bumps along the road, with regards to cleanup and things like that. And I'm just kind of hoping that these sorts of bumps don't happen, on this project. But I want to be mindful that we let the contractors know that cleanup is really important. It's not just the repair piece, but the cleanup piece is really important because, the residents who live in that area, they want the area to be nice and clean, right after the work is done. And, in a lot of situations, people get this assessment and, the sticker shock just kind of scares them and, they're not happy. And then all of a sudden the cleanup or just the work in itself, is very disruptive and it just makes it very difficult for people to just say we're doing the work well. So, if you can just, let the contractors know, that'd be great.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Any further discussion, questions? Appreciate the work that was done in the time allotted through the previous action, both by staff and Councilmember Gordon's hands-on approach. I think we have a good thing before us and a motion to approve. All in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
Dissenting, nay. That carries. We now will go to discussion item 2:15 on the agenda, pedestrian program. Director Kotke.
Mr. Chair, we have Mackenzie Turner Bargen here this morning to make the presentation on our pedestrian program. This is a receive and file item.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, committee members. My name is Mackenzie Turner Bargen. I work in Public Works within the bicycle and pedestrian section as our pedestrian planner. I'm here today to present on the pedestrian program to give you an update on everything that we're working on for this year. We'll start with a pedestrian master plan. This plan that was adopted in 2009 is the plan that guides the majority of the pedestrian program. So the goals here, well-connected walkway system, accessibility for all pedestrians, safe streets and crossings, pedestrian environment that fosters walking, a well-maintained pedestrian system, a culture of walking, funding tools and leadership for implementing pedestrian improvements. These are the guiding goals for this work, and so we'll get into the projects now. So to start with, that which will be spread pretty far and wide are durable crosswalk markings. A lot of the work within the pedestrian program comes from following projects that are happening, leveraging other projects, reconstructions, street maintenance projects, and things like that to follow those up and improve the pedestrian environment. Durable crosswalk markings are, rather than using paint to paint crosswalks, we go in and we use plastic materials that have a much longer lifetime of 5 to 10 years. In addition, we are also installing them in new dimensions to improve the visibility of the markings and pedestrians using them as well. On the left, there is a picture of Lyndale and Franklin. This installation is done in poly preform, which is a plastic tape that gets put down. Here we have 15-foot crosswalks, but one of the improvements that we're making right now is to pull the stop bars back a little further. This is one of our tests to pull the stop bar back to 15 feet. Typically, we have been marking these at 5 feet. So with this additional buffer, you can see that cars might encroach on this a little bit still, but they're still providing a lot of space between where they are stopping and the pedestrians that are using that facility. In addition, we are looking at increasing the width of the markings for the actual bars of the crosswalk to be 12 inches rather than 6, and then the stop bars are 24 inches to make everything more visible on the approach. On the right-hand side, we have an example of preformed thermoplastic. This is a material that gets melted onto the pavement. These are two that we are using more and more, but also keeping a close eye on them to evaluate their longevity in our climate, in our situation. This is a new crosswalk that was installed at Stinson and New Brighton last year, and this is the continental style with 10 by 2 blocks. Pedestrian signalization is another aspect of the pedestrian program that we are moving forward this year. Some things have been done for a while, other things are new this year. Some other things are just have a new twist on them. One thing that we're looking at experimenting with this year is a red flashing pedestrian signal. This is called a hybrid beacon, and so it would actually use a flashing red beacon much more like a stop sign. to stop vehicular traffic on the approach to allow for pedestrians and or bicyclists, if it's a trail facility, to cross. There will be, I believe we have approximately 10 locations designated as a test for this year. One of those will be at 31st and Girard in the uptown area. Additionally, we are looking at rectangular rapid flashing beacon at the new, along with the Cedar sidewalk improvement and a median that's going in there. Some other signalization pieces are more programming with leading pedestrian interval, which gives a pedestrian about anywhere from 3 to 6 seconds extra lead time before the vehicles move along. And then also accessible pedestrian signals, also known as APS, and countdown timers are something that will be included on all signal upgrades at an intersection that receives a new system. Here is an example of what some of those look like. On the left, we have the rectangular rapid flashing beacon. This is an amber beacon, but it's a rectangular bar and it flashes in a wigwag pattern. So the wigwag it's the pattern that is used by emergency service vehicles. So it's something that's eye-catching, but this is in an amber color, so it won't be mistaken with emergency services. But it has been found through various research studies to have a really high compliance rate, it's great. All of this research is being done on these pedestrian signals because it gives us a lot of support for implementing these and testing them out in Minneapolis. Next, in the center column, we have, this is just an example of what our countdown timers look like. These, and then below is the accessible pedestrian signals button, which you see on some of our signal systems right now at intersections, but not all of them. These two things will be installed with all new signal systems that are upgraded at a particular intersection when that happens. And then on the right-hand side, we have an example of the leading pedestrian interval. This currently exists right now in Minneapolis at Hennepin and Lagoon, as well as Hennepin and Lake. So pedestrians that are waiting to cross will get the pedestrian signal before the cars get the green light, thereby putting them a little bit forward in the intersection sooner to improve visibility, especially when it comes to conflicts with turning movements. Some more permanent construction projects that also include pedestrian improvements are Penn Osseo and 44th in North Minneapolis. This is an area that is receiving a 4-to-3 conversion, and in doing so has created space to provide pedestrian crossing medians and improved not one but two intersections for pedestrian crossing. Another project is 7th Street North. This is a little bit smaller scale. It will be just looking at ADA curb ramp upgrades as well as improved crosswalk markings, as well as some reconfiguration of pork chop islands to make them more accessible for folks to navigate. And then last on this page, we have the Cedar Avenue sidewalk improvement project that Mr. Engelman was talking about earlier. And with that project, we leveraged that project to include a new pedestrian crossing median at Cedar Avenue and what is the vacated 5th Street. So that will include a median as well as a rectangular rapid flashing beacon that includes APS, or accessible pedestrian signal. So if you look at the picture on the bottom here, this is an example of something similar in Chicago, though the Cedar Avenue project is also a reconfiguration of 4 lanes to 3, so slightly different from this photo from Chicago, but very similar. Some shared use projects. These are projects that are being implemented by programs outside of the pedestrian program. However, they include pedestrian aspects to them. This is not an all-inclusive list, but some of these are Ridgeway Parkway in Northeast Minneapolis by the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. The top photo here shows an example of that area, some really great views of the downtown skyline. This area currently only has a very narrow sidewalk, so this project will include a 12-foot shared path as well as an improved sidewalk, I believe. Some of the other ones are the James I. Rice and West River Parkway projects, just a rehabilitation of those trails along the parkway. Bluff Street Trail, which is connecting bicycles and pedestrians under the 35W bridge from bridge number 9 on the university campus, effectively completing a gap that exists currently between downtown and the University of Minnesota. The photo on the bottom is from the Star Tribune and shows that work taking place through the tunnel. 36th Street, which you are probably all familiar with, is Simon Blinsky's project in our office, which will create a bicycle and pedestrian I guess it's on the roadway, but it'll be a protected space, filling in a sidewalk gap that exists along the Lakewood Cemetery. And then lastly, Brackett Park is receiving some trail improvements as well. Onto our pilot programs for this year. The Parklet pilot program, if you're not familiar, a parklet is an expansion of the existing sidewalk designed for the public to relax and enjoy an urban environment. It is a temporary space in the public right-of-way dedicated for public use. For this year, how we are completing this is we have selected 3 locations. These installations, as you can see in the photo here, this is from New York City. Ours will be very, very similar to this. It'll have planters with plantings and enclosure on the 3 sides that are in the roadway, maintaining access immediately off the sidewalk. So the 3 locations for this year are in front of Juxtapositions Arts and Urban Homeworks on Emerson Avenue North, just north of West Broadway, in front of Colonial Warehouse, in front of the Martin Patrick 3 shop, as well as Spy House down on Nicollet Avenue. So these 3 locations will see the pilot installation. These structures this year are owned by the city of Minneapolis. And so with that, this is kind of a jump start to get people interested and excited about the program. And then later this fall, we will be launching an application-based program to allow for people to pursue their own parklet with city approval and everything like that. But then these 3 structures will be rotated around the city to give other areas a chance to experience the parklet and see if perhaps it can inspire some others within the community to create their own and pursue their own parklet in their area. The next pilot is the Plaza pilot. Space is created for the public to relax and enjoy the urban environment by repurposing portions of the public right-of-way using things like planters, other more interim design things like movable furniture, shade where needed. The example here is from New York City, as was the other one. They're doing a lot of great things there, so we're learning from them. So some of the proposed locations that have not yet been, these locations have not yet been finalized, but we're working through all of that. One idea was West Broadway and Oliver near the Capri Theater. Another being the complex intersection of Central Hennepin and 5th Street. As well as 14th Avenue Southeast in Dinkytown. So we're trying to use these not only as ways to provide space for the public to have access and just relax and enjoy the environment, but also in the instance of Central Hennepin and 5th Street, it is trying to improve what is a complex intersection for pedestrians. Lastly, our pilot evaluation and planning projects. So all of our pilot programs, some of them are experimental that are approved by FHWA. Others are pilots because we've not explored their installation in Minneapolis before. So the pilot evaluation that will take place this year are for the painted curb extensions that were installed last year. As you can see in this photo here, this is Portland and 6th. It's a use of capturing what would be a curb extension space by using interim strategies such as paint and vertical bollards. And then also just evaluating the parklet and plaza programs to see how those are going. And then lastly, the planning projects that will be taking place this year are, we have a pedestrian improvement project along West Broadway, along Franklin Avenue, and then a gap fill project up on Broadway Street Northeast. And additionally, we will be working on reorganizing, reassessing, and improving our crosswalk marking practices and updating those as appropriate. And that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments? I'll take Councilmember Gordon, followed by Councilmember Bender.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate this and seeing all the pilots coming forward, and I just wanted to make sure that you knew and that we all knew that looking at pedestrian access and convenience and enhancing the pedestrian experience is really important. It actually came up yesterday when we were just talking about the Minneapolis for a Lifetime plan, when we were trying to look at what can we do to make sure that the city works for everyone. People who are 80 as well as 8 or other ages, and this came up. And I guess I have a question. I'm curious if we actually grade crossings for pedestrians. I know that we have intersections, I guess I should say. We do a careful grading system that we've been using for years of intersections, and some of them are called failed intersections. But my understanding, that's all based on the wait time for a vehicle to get through the intersection. Are we grading our intersections yet for pedestrians?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Gordon, to my knowledge, we are not using a similar system to the level of service system that is used for intersections for vehicles at this time.
Well, I think that might be a really great way to do it. Right now, the thing that I can grab is I try to look at accidents. And so if you see conflicts with cars and pedestrians and accidents, I mean, that's one thing, but that really isn't telling us very much, except that that's a terrible, I guess, intersection for pedestrians if people are getting hurt. So I would be very interested in trying to come up with some system so that we could grade it for pedestrians as well. And then I think that will help us also identify where to make our investments and where not to. It also might help us drive a little bit more on our light timing, because I also think that gets very difficult for pedestrians. And I've even heard some complaints now where there's some crossings that the walk sign never comes on at all unless you push a button. And then often it's not nearly long enough for somebody to actually get across the street. So it's that's the other way to deal with it, I guess, is when we get complaints about it. So I'm very interested in that, and I'm also interested in making sure that it's done in a way that's working with our pedestrian advisory committee. And I'm assuming they've reviewed this plan, and they've been all these projects and been working closely with you on it. Is that true? They also, I had an opportunity to meet with the chair and some advisory committee members, and they have a very, I think, aggressive and interesting plan for how we can actually improve crossings. One of the things that I hear about a lot as the summer rolls on is, why isn't my crossing marked again? The paint's faded and it doesn't feel safe anymore. And sometimes we don't get to those until October or even later because of other work that's going on the way we have it structured with our crews. So I think that I was intrigued by the idea of coming up with a better system, maybe also figuring out when we're going to use the more durable markings and what intersections, what would mean that they'd qualify. We could start planning ahead what would it cost, and we could do that. And then I also think if we could come up with a system for actually how we'll get all our crosswalks repainted that need the repainting, if we're still using this paint that seems to wear out every year, sooner in the summer, it would really be great. Those are just some comments that I wanted to make while we were all here, and thank you so much for your work, and it'll be exciting to see these pilots and the results of them and as we move forward.
Councilmember Bender?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of brief questions. Thank you so much for all this great work. First, I wanted to quickly understand a bit more about the funding that you're using for these different programs. It seems like some of them are part of the project cost for reconstruction, but is it true that, is this the first year that you have a separate standalone budget for pedestrian improvements? Or could you just talk about where you're getting the funding for some of these crosswalk pilots and the the pedestrian signal funding?
Sure. Mr. Chair, committee members, Councilmember Bender. Most of the funding this year, you're correct that this year is kind of the first year that we have money dedicated to pedestrian improvements. One portion of that funding is a $435,000 piece that was dedicated within the Transportation and Public Works budget last year to go towards durable crosswalk, improved pedestrian markings, as well as innovative pedestrian projects. So within that, there will be the durable crosswalk markings being installed at a number of intersections. We may be able to do more than I have outlined right now. But also within that are things like the rectangular rapid flashing beacons, the median at Cedar, and as well as some other geometric type projects. But in addition, the parklet and the plaza pilots are rolled into that as well. And beyond that, we have, so those are our general funds. We do have some traffic safety capital going towards this, as well as our bicycle and pedestrian section office budget, a little bit here and there as well.
Thank you. Councilmember Glidden?
Thanks very much for the presentation. I know we've got other things on the list, so I'll try to just be brief with some comments. But it's I'm really interested to hear in what's happening around pedestrian improvements, and I do think this is an area where we've kind of started to coalesce and focus as a city, but I think there's definitely a lot more that we can do. And so it's a little bit of a choice. How are we going to make those decisions with our resources and with our efforts? I'm glad that Councilmember Bender asked the question about budget. One of the things I was just thinking about, this is a little off the wall question maybe, when you talk about gaps in the sidewalk system, does that include cemeteries? Or how do you list the issues with the cemeteries? Because I'll just say, as someone who probably has 3 large cemeteries that front major corridors near or in the 8th Ward, I just really noticed this a lot. And for those who don't know, cemeteries don't build sidewalks. I think it may be a state law or something that says they don't have to.
Yes, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Glidden. Yes, a lot. There are quite a few cemeteries within the city that do fall onto our sidewalk gap map. Lakewood being one of them, the one that's being rectified by the 36th Street project, but also Penn Avenue North along Crystal Lake Cemetery, numerous others that you're aware of. This is something, to my understanding, it is called out specifically in the pedestrian master plan to address those gaps at cemeteries because they are so prevalent. But as you spoke to, I believe that it's either in the city charter or ordinance or in the law somewhere that was not required of the cemeteries. So it is called out in the pedestrian master plan to be addressed, though.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think it's just an example of there are a lot of difficult issues, and sometimes they're issues that, in a way, we're saddled with. But for a built-out urban environment, I think we're going to need to figure out what's our way to address some of these issues, like those sidewalk gap issues. I'll just maybe mention it's interesting to hear about these initiatives. I am also interested, as Councilmember Gordon was alluding to, what are some of more of the measures and goals that we are developing that may be more appropriate to pedestrians, and setting that bar maybe a little bit higher than what we've done before. I thought that was a great question about rating of the intersections. I think we've been thinking about that a lot. We've been talking a little bit about 46th Street, and I know there's been some measurements around the freeway and how we measure for cars, but it's a very difficult intersection for pedestrians to navigate over the freeway and get to the transit station there, and I cannot imagine riding a bicycle in that area. It would seem and feel quite dangerous for someone like me who's not a really aggressive bike rider. So having those measures, I think, and then some goals would be great to see maybe when you're coming back to us. I don't know if this is planned to be an annual or something more than that. And then the last thing I'll just say, because it's not on your list, I know it wasn't planned, but boy, I'm really interested in our snow removal issues. And I know Director Kaki is aware that there's been a lot of interest in this, just generally as we have these very aggressive winters. And basically for many of us, you feel very trapped inside your home once it's winter. And I think that's another issue. We're going to have a better solution for how we're being more aggressive in the city, so that our residents can get around and use the city and use our transit system and all these other things during the wintertime. So just a few thoughts, knowing that we have to move on today. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Bender?
I did have just 2 quick other things. I just wanted to highlight, I'm really happy to see that we're working on the crosswalk marking process plan, and I assume that would include some analysis of the polytape and the thermoplastic that you have down now. Do you have a timeline for when that process will start and when it will be done?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Bender, are you the evaluation portion of things, or?
And then, yes, and then I don't know what you called it. Let me just check it was on your last slide. I think you called it.
The crosswalk practices?
Yes,
Oh,
crosswalk practices.
Yes. So as far as we will be evaluating how the poly and the thermo are doing, and those will we have some previous installations that we're looking at right now to make sure that we are choosing the right product that is going to last on those. And then as far as the crosswalk marking practices update goes, that will be, the intention is to have it updated and ready to go before next season comes along and the marking begins in 2015.
And then you mentioned that the parklet permit application will be available this fall.
Yes, it will be available this fall to then open up the program for broader installation in 2015.
Great. And then just one quick final. I think this is all a testament to what happens when we are able to give some standalone funding to pedestrian improvements. I think this is really great work, and that, especially if we are able to keep creating these strategies like the crosswalk marking strategy, prioritize some of our intersections better, that creating this funding for pedestrian improvements really goes a long way. It's a small amount of funding in the scope of our entire transportation budget, but I think it really makes a difference for people. So thank you.
Councilmember Gordon?
The last thing that I wanted to emphasize, I forgot to mention earlier, was how important I think it is that this work and the work of the Pedestrian Advisory Committee gets put into our Complete Streets policy. I think that this will be very significant, and part of that should be looking at what's the level of service for pedestrians, for bikes, for transit, for automobiles. So I'm hoping that you are very engaged in that process and you're part of that, and I look forward to seeing some of these ideas in that policy.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? I'll just add that I very much appreciate the work. I think this is a very strong movement from the department to address pedestrian issues in a very innovative and aggressive way. I think we have some areas where there's always room for improvement, always room for better analysis and data to guide future work. But I think this is a real strong step, and as Councilmember Gordon alluded to, our Citizen Commission has really come to its own. It's a relatively newer one, but it's really come into its own in terms of advising us and coming up with really good localized intel to guide our work, and I know they're very much a part of your work, and your work, of course, is appreciated as well. So thank you very much. With that, I will move to receive and file. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Dissenting, nay. Thank you. Okay, we'll move to the last discussion item as listed, and that will be Bike Week. Receive and file the Bike Week update. Director Kaki.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, we thought that this would be a good presentation. There was kind of a rebranding effort this year in the 2014 Minneapolis Bike Week, and we have Nick Ray Olson here today to kind of talk a little bit about the effort and some of the really, I think, tremendous participation both from a volunteer as well as just people participating in the events. So.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair, committee members. I'm Nick Ray Olson. I'm with the Bike and Pedestrian section in Public Works, and I'm here to give you a brief recap on Minneapolis Bike Week, which happened about over a month ago on May 4th through May 11th. Minneapolis Bike Week is the city's primary effort for bicycle education and encouragement. So for those of you who are not familiar with the event, it's an annual series of events and activities that encourages bicycling in Minneapolis. And the primary goal is to get people out riding, not people who already ride their bike, but new people, to try to encourage them to get out and give it a try. The event has existed since 2006 in some way, shape, or form, and has seen different variations through that time. In 2006, it was just a one-day event, Bike Walk to Work Day, with just a single downtown celebration. In 2 years, it expanded out to be a whole week of events and emerged into Twin Cities Bike Walk Week. So not only was it a week-long event, but it also included stuff outside of Minneapolis, the whole Twin Cities area. And then in 2010, it switched over to June, so in previous years it had been in May. And for reasons that I'll get to in a moment, earlier this year, we switched it back to May and rebranded and rebooted the event as Minneapolis Bike Week. So the reason that we considered even rebranding or rebooting the event was there were some challenges that Twin Cities Bike Walk Week faced. Those were that there was some organizational discontinuity through the years. The event jumped around between a bunch of different organizations and never really quite found a home. The event also only focused on biking to and from work, and many of us felt that the workplace-only focus of the event was too narrow. There are plenty of people who like to ride their bike or are interested in riding their bikes to places besides work. It also included walking at the time, and unfortunately, walking events were largely marginalized in these events. Juxtaposing biking and walking in the same events we found to be pretty not very effective to get people out walking, and walking really only consisted about 10% of participation through the years. We also felt that the June date neglected engaging students, which is, of course, students bike a lot, of course. And it also does not coincide with National Bike Month efforts. And then due to all these reasons, we felt that the event really never realized its full potential. So we took a look at it and decided to reboot it as Minneapolis Bike Week. And as you can see, as the title suggests, there was a few major changes that occurred. First was that it was a Minneapolis-only event. There was a St. Paul Bike Week during the same week, so you could participate either side of the river. Then we switched the focus only on bicycling. It would be awesome if a walk week, some type of walk encouragement would occur in the future, but lumping the two together we found to be largely unsuccessful. We focused on encouraging all types of bicycling, not just bicycling to and from work, but all types of utilitarian cycling as well as recreational riding. We shifted the event to May in order to coincide with the National Bike Month efforts. We started a partnership with the Minneapolis Bicycle Coalition, which had only been involved marginally in the past, and that was a great move. They were very successful in terms of getting us volunteer efforts to realize our events. And of course, with any reboot, we had to rebrand it, came up with a new name and new logo and all that sort of fun stuff. So in 2014, we had 150 events. Just by comparison, we had about 12 events last year, and last year was 2013 had been the most successful year until this year. So had 150 events this year, over 8 themed days. Each day had a different theme that highlighted a different way to get involved in bicycling. There was a bike to work day, a bike to school day, a nice ride day, a couple different interesting things there. And then just to highlight one of our largest events in terms of participation was our commuter pit stops. We deployed 15 locations, a network of places that bicyclists could stop on the way to or from work or wherever they were headed and get some support in terms of there was free bike repair. We gave away free bike lights. We put 2,000 pairs of bike lights on bicycles that didn't have them previously this week. So very proud of that effort. Gave away free maps and other resources, a lot of food. No one can argue with free food. And through these efforts, we're happy to report that it was a record year in terms of participation this year. We had about 10,000 people, actually over 10,000 bicyclists attend events throughout the week. As you can see from that fun little graph there, it is a smashing success by all the metrics that we have. And then also on the left here, that's not a comprehensive list of all the different areas of participation, but it does highlight some of the new audiences we were able to reach by expanding beyond simply focusing on bike to work, including bike to park events, nice ride events, biking to school. We had a bike to local businesses day where we highlighted biking to local businesses and supporting local businesses, as well as the commuter pit stops. Media exposure, this was also a success in terms of media exposure. We had the most media hits of any bike week or previous iteration. We had 6 TV segments through the week, 7 print articles, a couple radio segments, and then a whole mess of media exposure in terms of social media. Quick lowdown of the budget. So Bike Week was paid for through the FHWA NTP Ambassador Program. And the largest portion of the allocation towards Bike Week went to staff time. We had a couple of prizes, some giveaways, and then purchased a few ads as well to spread the word. And just wrapping up in terms of next steps, I think we would love to see a Minneapolis Bike Week in 2015, given the success of the event this year. I know that the Minneapolis Bicycle Coalition has expressed interest in being involved again next year, and would, of course, love for the city to consider supporting it. And that concludes the formal presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just quickly, I think that this was a really incredibly successful event. I completely agree with the branding it as a Minneapolis-focused event. I think it helps people just connect more to the event. I was able to bike to work with the mayor, one of many council members that participated in that bike to work day to City Hall. And I think, so I really support continuing bike to work, Minneapolis Bike Week and the city's involvement as well.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? I just will extend a kudos as well. It's an incredible performance. And it's certainly kind of our two-pronged approach. It's not just infrastructure that advances our bicycling goals, but it's also these events and education and sort of the softer efforts that we have that promote participation, and it shows Portland that we're not coasting. We're going to stay number one for a long time to come. So thank you very much. With that, I'll receive and file this report. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Dissenting nay. That carries. We now will have an update that will precede. We will have an evening meeting, and I will take an action for this committee meeting to extend into that one. But before I get into that action, I would invite Director Kotke to give us some updates and overviews of the topic before us, which is Southwest LRT. Seems like we have a nice parade of modes this last section of the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. So I'm actually pleased to announce that this morning there was a joint announcement by the City of Minneapolis and Met Council that we have reached a tentative agreement with Met Council on the Southwest LRT project. So I'll just go over some basics here and then get into depth in a bit more. So we have a tentative agreement, and it includes two memorandums of understanding. One memorandum of understanding pertains to the redesign of the Minneapolis portion of the Southwest LRT. The second memorandum of understanding pertains to ensuring that the Kenilworth Freight Corridor remains in public ownership and addresses other use issues in the Kenilworth Corridor. So, as you had indicated, we're going to adjourn this meeting and resume this evening. And at the evening meeting, we'll be making a full presentation on the tentative agreement. But what I'd like to do this morning is just give you kind of a high-level overview of the agreements. I believe besides the joint announcement, these MOUs will actually be on the city's website, or at least the mayor's website here shortly, if not right now, so people can see them at that point. Also, this evening we're going to be doing a PowerPoint presentation regarding the agreements, and that will also be posted. I think we're hoping to have it posted sometime yet this morning, so people can take a closer look at the presentation that will happen this evening. So with that, so I will give a basic outline of the first MOU, and then Peter Wingenius will be giving an outline of the second MOU. So before I speak on the MOUs, I would like to speak a bit about the municipal consent process and schedule. And maybe just to go over a little history. So on April 22nd, Met Council submitted a municipal consent plans to the 5 cities in the county on the Southwest LRT project. And after a 30-day review period, a required review period, Met Council and Hennepin County Regional Rail Authority held public hearings on May 29th, which started the 45-day clock for the cities and the counties to conclude their public hearing and approval votes by July 14th. It is my understanding that the July 14th date still applies to the 4 other cities along the corridor. However, due to the significant design changes in the Minneapolis portion coming out of our negotiations, Met Council asked to have a new set of municipal consent plans for the Minneapolis portion only. I want to reemphasize that. It's for the Minneapolis portion only, and resubmit those plans to the City of Minneapolis and Hennepin County, which will set new approval dates for those 2 agencies. So we expect Met Council to approve the amended project scope for the Minneapolis portion tomorrow, July 9th, and set a public hearing date with Hennepin County Regional Rail for August 13th, and then submit the new plans to both the city and the county the following day, Thursday, July 10th. We also expect that Hennepin County will be voting on this new set of plans on August 19th. Minneapolis intends to act quickly and schedule our public hearing on August 19th, and our approval vote is scheduled for August 29th, or will be scheduled for August 29th, and at least that's the intentions. So with with that quick review of the process, let me just highlight some of the major items in the MOU. And there's, as I mentioned, there's 2 MOUs, and so the MOU that I'm going to be highlighting for people going on the web and taking a look at it is referred to as the proposed redesign of a portion of Southwest Light Rail project. So proposed redesign of a portion of Southwest Light Rail project. The largest change is the elimination of the north shallow tunnel, in addition of an at-grade station at 21st Street. These 2 changes will result in a net savings of approximately $60 million for the project. 50% of the net savings, $30 million, will be available to meet the city's proposed physical design changes. The remaining 50% will be used to reduce the overall project budget. Improvements requested by the city that fall outside the allocated 50% will be considered along with contingency funds request as the project progresses. Another important point to make, it is understood by all parties that the proposed design changes are subject to acceptance by funding from the FTA, Federal Transit Administration. However, with that said, the changes that we're proposing, it is our feeling that these are FTA acceptable changes. So with that, let me just highlight some of the elements. They're identified in what we call Exhibit 1, which is part of the MOU. We wanted to reemphasize the importance of the south tunnel, the tunnel, the shallow tunnel south of the channel. So that is in the MOU. The tunnel south of the water channel will be built as indicated in the current municipal consent package. As I mentioned, the tunnel north of the water channel will be removed and a station will be added at 21st Street Station, or at 21st Street. The 21st Street Station will include pedestrian connections to Cedar Lake. The next item, which we reviewed as very important, has to do with the improvements to the Kenilworth corridor itself. The parties agree that the Kenilworth corridor is located in a park-like setting. The corridor shall be designed to a park-like level of amenity, not only restoring but improving pre-existing conditions. Design and restoration shall include, but not be limited to, native plantings, mature trees, and the like. It is agreed that the corridor shall be restored and constructed consistent with this park-like environment in the proximity to the chain of lakes to the extent reasonably possible, so as not to impact neighboring parks or water bodies or to impair the existing park-like setting. The council, Met Council, will select a landscape architect with the city and the Minneapolis Park Board serving on the evaluation panel. The city, the Park Board, and representatives of the affected neighborhoods will participate with the council in a collaborative design process for the corridor. Other items, noise mitigation will be added based on the supplemental draft EIS, which we're expecting yet this fall. We are going to be adding freight rail safety improvements in the form of what we call freight rail guardrail, and those are we'll show that this evening of what that pertains to, but it's called the inner guardrail. Without going through the entire list, there are improvements at all the stations within Minneapolis. Most of the improvements are associated with addressing and improving the non-motorized safety in connections around the stations. I think it's important to point out that Minneapolis does not have park and rides at our stations, at our LRT stations, and that those are expensive. Park and rides are expensive to build. And the way people in Minneapolis get to our LRT stations is either through transit, walking, or bicycling. And therefore, we think is very important, and it was a big emphasis for us in these negotiations to make sure that we had the appropriate connections and access to the stations. So as you take a look at the exhibit in the MOU, you'll see that most of the improvements that we are identifying are associated with that basic theme. Just to give you maybe a couple of highlights of examples. At the Royalston station, as an example, you're going to see, improved pedestrian connections, both for bus transit, because we have some major bus transit connections at that vicinity, as well as the city's farmers market. Another really important pedestrian connection is at the Van Wyck station. They're going to have a pedestrian bridge that will connect the Braemar Meadows and adjoining neighborhoods to the Van Wyck station. That's a connection that we didn't previously have, and it's a very important connection. There are other improvements dealing with lighting, signage, security that you'll see addressed in the exhibit. Lastly, as I mentioned, we actually have improvements at all the stations. At the West Lake Street station, we are also looking at building enhanced pedestrian connections and improving the pedestrian environment on the West Lake Street Bridge, as well as realigning some of the streets around the station to provide for better development opportunities. So that's a very high-level, quick summary of that MOU. And what I'll do now is turn it over to Peter Wingenius, who can speak about the second MOU.
Thank you, Director Cockney. Welcome, Mr. Wigenius.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The second MOU concerns a question which is very important in the context of freight remaining in the corridor, a question that probably wouldn't have been very important if freight had been removed from the corridor. And that question is, what happens to the land? The land that within the corridor today is mostly owned by the Hennepin County Regional Rail Authority. But in the future, we know that Met Council will also own a portion of land, which they will be purchasing from BNSF. Roughly speaking, the Hennepin County portion is over 80% of the land that's going to be used in the corridor, probably more. The Met Council piece is significantly smaller. But they're both important for a couple of reasons. It is very important to the neighborhood and to the city of Minneapolis that the freight situation not get worse than it is today, and that's not a given. Today, the land on which the freight operates is in public hands. It is owned by HICRA. TC&W owns their trains, and they have a trackage rights agreement with Hennepin County to operate on Hennepin County, or HICRA's land. The trackage rights agreement prevents TC&W from inviting other carriers to use their land, to use the tracks. So TC&W can use it, but they can't grant authority to other carriers to use that land. That is very important for the residents and very important for the city to maintain. It is important to note that what I'm describing is not a get for the city. It is not a win. There are things that are also part of the status quo which are not helpful to the city. The status quo also includes the fact that TC&W could be bought by a bigger railroad, and a bigger railroad would likely get the trackage rights agreement as part of that purchase. Second of all, TC&W could decide to run more frequent trains or a more dangerous mix of products. And as we've painfully learned through this process, local units of government do not have the power under federal law to stop that. So those are two things in the status quo that we would like to change, but we cannot. But in consultation with the freight experts that we consulted, both here and in D.C., they said very clearly to us, it is in the public interest, it is in our residents' interest to maintain the corridor in public ownership and to maintain the trackage rights agreement as it currently exists today. Again, that is not a win for the city. That is simply holding court and making sure that the commitments that already exist are maintained so that in the future, nobody can say that the city of Minneapolis or other public entities made the situation worse. and made it more likely that more frequent trains would occur carrying more dangerous cargo. So two elements that you'll see in the second MOU say that the land will be only transferred to another public entity, never to a private entity. And number two, that the trackage rights agreement will be maintained as it currently exists. And again, that prohibits TC&W from granting access to other carriers. We think that's very important because we're told TC&W wants to basically maintain their current business model. And if they did, that would be important for the city of Minneapolis. We don't want a situation where they or a different railroad can, in effect, have their cake and eat it too, which is where they run their own trains and also get revenue from allowing other carriers using a more dangerous product mix to use the trains. So those are two elements of the city's position, and now reflected in the agreement of the freight land MOU. Here's two other important components of the agreement. Obviously, we want the Kenilworth Corridor bike and ped trail to remain. This is the second most well-used bike facility in the city of Minneapolis, second only to the Midtown Greenway. And those of you familiar with the Midtown Greenway know that's an incredibly high bar. There's more traffic on the Midtown Greenway than on 90% of Minneapolis streets, even when you factor in vehicles, more people. And the Kenilworth Corridor Bike Trail is just one rank down from Midtown on that list. It's incredibly well used. It needs to be preserved. The agreement states that it will be. The city advocated in the mediation process that in addition to preserving the bike trail, that leftover land not used for freight, not used for LRT, and not needed for development parcels, of which there are a few, but they're important. Leftover land should go to the Minneapolis Park Board to become parkland. One of the things that has been painful for the community is to be told that the corridor isn't parkland, even though it's been treated that way for 30 years. Well, in the future, it will be parkland, and therefore have the protections of that it will be parkland in the future. Now, you might be wondering, what do we mean? How much leftover land is there? Well, on the south end of the corridor, not very much at all. The south end of the corridor is incredibly narrow. There is very little leftover land to speak of. But as you move further north, the corridor widens. It's kind of shaped like a horn. And at the northernmost point, there's quite a bit of land. And the city believes that the Minneapolis Park Board is the correct owner of that long term. And when we say long term, after the Southwest LRT project is completed. We are in conversation with Hennepin County on these same issues, and obviously, as the current owner, the Park Board and Hennepin County are going to need to have conversations about this. But the city position and our expectations of the Met Council are reflected in the agreement. So all four components are in the MOU, that the freight will remain in public hands, that the trackage rights agreement will be maintained, that the park trail, the bike and ped trail will be preserved, and that the leftover land not used for freight or LRT purposes should go to the Minneapolis Park Board. Let me just think for a moment to make sure I'm covering the main content of there. Oh, and sorry, final point. The agreement is silent on who the ultimate owner is. The ultimate owner of the corridor could be all of the land that is used for freight could ultimately be in Met Council's hands. It could be in MnDOT's hands. It could remain in Hennepin County's hands. The city is not taking a position on who the ultimate owner is, as long as the ultimate owner is a public entity. And obviously not the city, because this is not a field where we have expertise. We don't own any freight land or interact with freight companies in that manner. So the agreement is silent on who the ultimate owner of the corridor will be, but it is clear that it will only be a public sector owner. That is the rough contents of the second MOU.
Thank you. Any questions per that presentation of the two MOUs? Councilmember Glidden?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I don't have questions, but I just did want to make a few comments. One of which was to acknowledge to the public that I have been part of the process along with Chair Reich to try to identify what might be a path forward for Minneapolis around Southwest Light Rail. And so to that end, I am recommending to my colleagues and for, of course, the colleagues who have not been part of this discussion, they are hearing this for the first time, just like members of the public. What is this proposal around Southwest Light Rail? And I hope that my colleagues will support this. I do think that this is a critical project for our region. It's one that continues to build on our regional transit spine. But we have been in a position in Minneapolis with a lot of challenges around what has been proposed, a route that we did not originally agree with, dealing with a situation involving co-location, again, that we did not agree with. And so I'll just say again, for my perspective, this was about how to make this project better than originally proposed in a way that serves more residents in Minneapolis and protects the Kenilworth corridor in a better way than proposed. Some of the improvements I want to make clear that the stations in Minneapolis, many of them have been in challenging locations. They are difficult to get to, and that is one of the reasons why this has been a bit of a challenging route for Minneapolis. And so the idea with making this very difficult choice or recommendation to eliminate the North Shell Tunnel, in part, is about how to make these stations best serve within the project budget the most residents possible, how to make them accessible to the most residents possible, how to make them better for development purposes. And so I think some of the things that are proposed will at least help along those lines. Some other aspects, I'll just say that were very, very critical, and I'll agree with Peter Reginius here, are these issues about freight rail ownership staying within public hands. And we need to be careful not to overstate what that means, but I think any protection, the rail safety improvements are also part of this, but any protection to not making what I would just suggest is a bit of a bad situation worse is what we need to do, what we need to promise the public that we put our best foot forward to make sure that at least we are keeping the status quo with public ownership of freight rail land. And so I feel that that was an important accomplishment, and I want to thank the Met Council for agreeing to this, and that we are also working with Hennepin County on an agreement around this. The other thing I just wanted to bring up, because it's not reflected in these agreements, but it has been a big part of, I would say, the public discourse as well as private discussions with the Met Council, has been about how does Southwest Light Rail serve or perhaps not serve in the areas of equity in terms of serving North Minneapolis to the best degree possible, to serving other areas in, I guess, what I'll call Met Council's language, racially concentrated areas of poverty. And there's been a coalition of organizations and individuals, in part, that have been convened by Congressman Ellison that put together a package of proposals, and those have been publicly distributed and have been available. And the city of Minneapolis has agreed with many, if not most, of those proposals, strongly agreed with those proposals. We are waiting to see what the Met Council will propose, what Met Council staff will propose to the Met Council around what I think they are calling their equity package. And again, we think that from the city perspective, finding better ways to do more than what is currently programmed will be critical to serving areas in Minneapolis and all along the Southwest Corridor, I will say, that have not been best served today. And this includes how we're looking for opportunities for jobs, for entrepreneurs of color, for access that, again, better serves those who will really be continuing to use bus service as a way to get to this light rail and look for ways to expand on that connectivity. So I just want to say we're waiting for what will be the proposal by the Met Council, but these are some issues that are very important to the city of Minneapolis and that we strongly advocated for and will continue to do so. So thank you to staff, and I will certainly be participating in the meeting this evening and look forward to continuing to hear from the public.
Thank you. Mr. Wagenius?
Mr. Chair, on the heels of Steve Kotke's comments, I neglected to, I dove right into the MOU, and I just wanted to say something briefly on behalf of the mayor. First to second, Councilmember Glidden's comments. As you know, the mayor and I also were part of the mediation team. And on behalf of the mayor, I wanted to say the following. The city of Minneapolis has always strongly supported the vision for Southwest LRT. Our support now comes at a high cost, an unexpected and unwelcome cost, because freight was supposed to be removed. Governor Dayton is correct. The Kenilworth corridor will not be the same. It could have been far worse, however, if not for the protections secured in this tentative agreement. With freight staying in the corridor, and given the constraints that we face, we believe this is the most responsible way to get the project built. We expect that and understand why residents along the Kenilworth corridor will be disappointed, but the mayor believes the greater good demands that we seek a path for Southwest LRT to be able to move forward. And the mayor will also be recommending, along with Councilmember Glidden and Councilmember Reich, recommending that after folks have had an opportunity to review the package, obviously there's a lot of detail and a lot of questions to be answered, but the mayor will be recommending approval. I also wanted to just briefly set the record straight. We're now no longer bound by the confidentiality of the mediation process, so we're able to share information with the public, which we're anxious to do. Some of the information that's been out there has been misleading, and I'd just like to speak to one piece. Some of the reporting implies that Minneapolis gets money from the agreement to use as we see fit for transit improvements. It's highly misleading. No money will come to Minneapolis. But the agreement does spell out how FTA-approved project dollars will be allocated to pedestrian improvements, noise mitigation, and high-quality landscape restoration. All of these project components are FTA-eligible in-project expenses specifically to make Southwest LRT better for Minneapolis residents and for the project as a whole, as well as better for park users than the project otherwise would have been. So I wanted to make sure that clarification was made, and I stand ready, Mr. Chair, if there are any other questions.
Thank you for that. Councilmember Gordon?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I also wanted to thank you for all your work on this, as well as the Council Vice President and the Mayor and the Mayor's Office and Mr. Wagenius and everybody else who's been involved. Of course, we're just learning about this now, and I haven't reviewed the Memorandum of Understandings and I haven't seen any of the drawings and those kinds of things, but one question that came up relates to letter I think that we all got on June 23rd from a Lakes and Parks Alliance, and I think it's a Gray Plant Moody law firm, and they made a pretty strong case that the shallow tunnel option has not been studied as part of a environmental impact statement, and there has been no supplemental study that's done. And I'm just curious if the completion of the environmental impact study is a contingency related to what we're going to do in order for us to move forward. It's certainly something that I would look forward to and expect, and I just wanted to be very public about that right now at my first opportunity. Was this part of the discussions, and is our assumption that this will be completed before we approve this?
Director Kotke, do we have comment on that?
Mr. Chair, if I maybe a clarification of the question, but if you're asking is the additional environmental work that is going on right now, which is a supplemental draft EIS, will not be completed by the time we would be taking a vote on this.
Is it going to be completed ever?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Gordon, yes, they're currently working on it, and they anticipate the completion, I believe, early this fall, is what I understand.
Would it be a violation of the state or federal law for us to give consent prior to completion of this environmental impact statement?
If I may, I don't believe we're in a position to opine on that matter at this time.
It might be good to get an opinion on that, for me anyway, because I'm a little bit confused about how that works. The last issue that I wanted to just raise is the park board. Have they been informed, included? I know that they came out, I read a resolution from the park board where I believe they were saying they wanted a deep tunnel under the channel. So this looks very different from what the park board was asking for. And so how are communications going to be going on with, I'm assuming they weren't, I know that they weren't in the mediation, but I think now it's going to be an important thing for us to think about is how we're reaching out and communicating with the park board.
We did have a couple sessions with affected area council members and members of the Park and Rec and their staff. Maybe Mr. Reginius can highlight some of those conversations and how they intertwined with our more direct communications and recent communications with the Met Council.
The chair is correct. The negotiation was a two-party negotiation. It was strictly City of Minneapolis and Met Council folks at the table with Judge Boylan. Prior to that process starting, we did meet with the park board and got a sense of their preferences. I just want to be very precise in the language because there have been so many versions of potential tunnels and tunneling. I just want to be clear. I don't think the park board was expecting a deep tunnel. The park board wanted further information and further engineering to be done on a deeper version of a shallow tunnel which would go underneath the channel, but that is distinctly different from a deep tunnel. A deep tunnel is a fundamentally different construction method. A shallow tunnel of any depth is an open pit construction method which involves lots of noise along the entire length of the corridor, lots of truck traffic to remove lots of dirt on narrow streets throughout the length of that corridor, unlike a deep tunnel, which is more expensive and has construction impacts really only on either end of the tunnel. And I think you know the difference, and I just wanted to be precise for the sake of folks that might be listening. But I think that is maybe a piece of what we'll be hearing from the park board. They're in the same position you are, council member, where they're going to be reviewing the information and asking questions.
And Ken, I think there's a question from your previous comment around the DES that Councilmember Glidden wishes to share.
Well, I really appreciate you correcting that. That was a bad use of the term deep. There's many, but it was at least they went under the channel, so I appreciate that. And I'll let Councilmember Glidden respond too, but I just wanted to say, despite those questions, this is enormous progress. Many of the things that I was interested in looking for, I'm seeing in this, and I just really appreciate the good work that's gone forward, and I think now we're going to have to really get into the details in the weeks ahead.
Thank you. Councilmember Glidden, and then Councilmember Bender.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment perhaps, and then I'll pose maybe a question to Director Kaki on Councilmember Gordon's question or point regarding when is the final DEIS anticipated. And I do believe that your question about kind of the legal question is really one for the Met Council. So I just wanted to clarify that. And I say that because Minneapolis has not proposed this timeline. Minneapolis is not asking the City Council to take a vote, but we are now within a process that if we do not vote, my understanding, I just want to clarify with Director Kotke, is that if you do not vote by or take a position by the required timeline, it just essentially means you agree to the proposed package, the municipal consent package. So that would be the outcome of just delay, and this is why I actually have been kind of confused by all these comments in the media about when is Minneapolis, well, if we don't vote, it means we agree to the package. So, Director Kotke, am I right on that?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Glidden, that is my understanding as well.
Okay, so the timeline is not something we have chosen, but we are required under law to comply with that timeline, and then I guess the legal questions would go to the Met Council.
Very good, thank you. Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that clarification as well, because I think we all share concern over the environmental quality of the lakes. So I appreciate that a lot. And also wanted to echo so much work has gone into this, and the leadership of the chair and Council Vice President Glidden have been critical, along with the mayor's office. I think as one of the people that's just getting a chance to see this information for the first time, I imagine one of the questions that most people in the public will be to understand why we would support getting rid of one of the tunnels but not the other. And so I wondered if staff could just, I know we'll have lots of time to get into these questions, but if you could detail some of the factors that went into making the decision to support the elimination of the north tunnel and to keep the south tunnel.
Mr. Wagenius.
Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, Council Member, that is the most obvious question, so let me attempt to answer it. Why remove the North Shallow Tunnel? There is no one single reason the city sought to remove the North Tunnel, but we believe this package as a whole is a better resolution that balances the need to protect residents, parkland, and our city waters. Frankly, the city has never viewed the shallow tunnels as a gift. They were not requested by the city, they were presented to the city. Our skepticism of the shallow tunnels have grown as we become more familiar with the downsides that the shallow tunnels involve. All these downsides need to be measured against the upsides, as well as the level of need for each of the tunnels. As we measure those trade-offs, our unanimous city staff recommendation is that the downsides of the North Tunnel are not worth it. Let me just outline those briefly. First, the tunnels are very divisive in the community. The tunnels divide residents into winners and losers. If you live near a midpoint of a tunnel, you would likely experience less noise. If you live near a portal, you would likely experience more noise, perhaps more noise than if the tunnel wasn't there at all, due to the sound bouncing off the tall retaining walls that would be needed at the tunnel portals. Furthermore, the tunnels do nothing for the residents north and south of the tunnels, nor between the two tunnels at the channel between the two lakes. The presence of the two portals pointed at the channel may make the situation worse. Number two, construction impacts. It has been said that the shallow tunnels are like the deep tunnel but cheaper. That is not true. For example, shallow tunnels are built using, as I described, an open pit construction method, which will require loud pile driving and noise and dust from lots of truck traffic to remove a lot of dirt. 3, plantable space. The space over the top of a shallow tunnel, unlike a deep tunnel, cannot have trees on it because the roots would grow into the roof of the tunnel chamber. 4, visual blight. The shallow tunnels require, if we were to build both with 4 portals, would require the construction of over 1,000 feet of lineal crash walls / retaining walls. These walls would be at each of the 4 portals, in total equaling 1,000 feet. And unlike the trains themselves, which are less frequent on evenings and weekends, the visual blight of these tall walls, 6 foot high on 2 foot berms, a total of estimated 8 feet, would be present 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This is particularly impactful from the channel northward, which is the more wild and natural segment of the corridor. Number 5, project certainty. The residents of the corridor have already experienced one promise, the promise that freight would be removed, going unfulfilled. We do not want to set up residents for another disappointment. In effect, the city is letting go of an amenity of questionable value, mixed value, in favor of a greater degree of project certainty regarding freight ownership, the quality of the land restoration, and a whole set of critical pedestrian and corridor improvements, which our public works staff can speak to, without which we believe residents would find the project substantially less accessible and substantially less attractive. So your second question, if those are reasons that we would not want the north tunnel, then why would we want to keep the south shallow tunnel? It goes to level of need. There are major differences between the north and south shallow tunnel. First, narrowness. The south part of the corridor is much more narrow, so narrow that if the south tunnel is not built, the Kenilworth corridor ceases to exist. There are no comparable substitutes. From a transportation perspective, the south tunnel is necessary both to maintain the second most well-used bike trail in the city, second only to the Midtown Greenway, but we also want to avoid an at-grade crossing at Cedar Lake Parkway. Avoiding an at-grade crossing at Cedar Lake Parkway will make the conditions there significantly safer. Impacts and mitigations. The extreme narrowness at the south ends means there's not a lot of room for other forms of attractive visual mitigation, like trees. The walls of the portal in the south end are less intrusive in terms of visual impact because the setting is filled with structures and less natural. And finally, the obvious, stations. The south tunnel does not require the removal of any stations. The north tunnel does require the removal of the 21st Street station, which means residents would have to experience all the downsides of the tunnel, but not be able to actually ride the train to their neighborhood. Finally, I would just add, a member of our public works staff reminded me that the DAS states that the co-location alternative would require the acquisition of, this is without the south tunnel, would require the acquisition of 57 townhome parcels along the Kenilworth corridor. When you add up the fair market value of all these parcels, it comes up to a total of more than $15 million. Beyond the fact that we don't want to obviously remove folks, that's a great deal of expense. Not taking homes was a core comment in our City of Minneapolis 2012 DEIS comments. Even if the trail would be removed, which is unacceptable to the city, but even if the trail would be removed, as some have suggested, there would not be enough space to run freight next to light rail without some property takings in the narrowest sections. So I hope that summarizes that the situation with the north tunnel and the south tunnel are drastically different.
Thank you. Councilmember Glidden? Oh, Councilmember Palmisano?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm in great appreciation of all of the work and the efforts that have been done. And I know that through this mediation process and through the cone of silence that you were all in, you were not immune to a lot of the questions that we were all getting around this project. But could you speak a little bit, and I'm not sure whom to ask about this, but are there thoughts to share about, do we think we'll see the same sort of economic development along the Southwest Light Rail line? This extension of it is what we've seen along the Central Corridor line leading up to its opening day?
Good question. Mr. Guinness.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Council Member. That's a great question, and I want to piggyback off a comment that Councilmember Glidden made earlier. The stations along Southwest LRT are very different one from another. Just as an example, we are expecting a substantial amount of development and ridership, current and future ridership through development at the Westlake station. We don't have those expectations of the 21st Street station. That is probably the most dramatic contrast. Westlake will be high ridership, high development, 21st Street Station, we're not expecting additional development. There will be access to a park. There'll be access for the residents in the neighborhood, and that's important. But those are the two extremes, and all the other stations are somewhere in between. You asked specifically about the Central Corridor, and that's a very helpful comparison. No, well, we do not expect to see the same level of development as along the Central Corridor. But frankly, Central Corridor will likely be the gold standard against which everything is measured from a development standpoint. We don't expect any project to be as successful as the Central Corridor when it comes to economic development. As Councilmember Glidden indicated, the stations along Southwest LRT, at least those in Minneapolis, are remote, inaccessible, and hard to find compared to the stations that we're accustomed to along the Central Corridor, or along Hiawatha for that matter, which are easy to find and accessible from all directions. That is a critical reason why the tentative agreement on Southwest LRT includes critical investments in pedestrian access to make those stations, limited as they may be due to their locations, as accessible as they can be. Despite these challenges, and I want to be clear that, again, the comparison with Central Corridor is a comparison that no other project will meet. Despite these challenges, we believe Southwest LRT does have the potential to be a very successful line. But how successful it becomes depends on decisions that are not yet made. Decisions regarding transit connections that are made to Southwest LRT, and decisions about economic development at the stations that can accommodate economic development like Westlake.
Thank you. Councilmember Yang?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Wagenius, you talked about these connections, and I'm wondering, these future connections that need to be made, were they a part of the MOUs at all?
They are. I'm not the best equipped person to speak to it, but you'll see in the, I guess it's the pleasure of the committee at what level of detail you want to go into. I know that you want to conclude by noon, but in the presentation you'll see here, and actually, if you'll allow me, let me just make this a moment to advertise to folks. We strongly encourage anybody who's listening to this to go to the city's website, to the mayor's website, where you can see the text of both of the MOUs, and to the link to this committee meeting, at which people can look at the presentation, which you'll see on your screens here, which we will go through in detail tonight. And what you'll see there is that there were significant opportunities at all 5 stations to add project components, essential project components that will make the stations more accessible. Westlake is the biggest example, but for example, at Van Wyck, our package includes a bridge that will connect directly from Bryn Mawr Meadows to the station. I think that's highly sought after by the community, and very important to have that station meet its potential. Very important for both its near-term potential and also its potential as a development site. You'll see examples of that when we go through the presentation in detail tonight at all 5 stations.
Mr. Chair, really quickly, I appreciate that. I think for myself, I'm much more concerned about, you talk about the Van Wyck station, there's a Penn station, there's the Rolliston stations, and for myself, people talk about, access for North Minneapolis, and a big chunk of North Minneapolis needs to somehow get connected to those stations, because those stations are at the bottom part of North Minneapolis, if we can even call it that. And so that's much more my concern. But certainly I've not had a chance to read any of this stuff, and so I'm going to look into it. But I'll look forward to the briefing later on then.
Mr. Chair, council member, your observation is exactly correct. These stations just scrape the southernmost edge of North Minneapolis. They're not particularly accessible. We need to do what we can, both in terms of pedestrian access and also in terms of bus connections. We're anticipating that most of the bus connections are going to happen at the Royalston station. There's a huge amount of currently high volume, some of the most well-used, least subsidized transit lines in the city along Emerson, Fremont, and Penn run right along by the Royalston station. We want to make sure the connection between where people would get off the bus and get on Southwest LRT is as good as it can possibly be. But frankly, we don't want to settle for that. Van White Station is a connection. Van White itself is a connection between North and South Minneapolis, which didn't used to exist. And it would be a shame if we didn't take full advantage of that to provide a north-south bus connection that allowed people to access that station directly without having to go to Royalston. Penn is yet more challenging, but our expectation is all of the above. What you're going to see in the agreement now is the pedestrian connections, which are in the MOU, and what we're going to continue to advocate for in the future is that as the bus routes are redesigned, that they're designed to take full advantage of Southwest LRT to the degree that it can be, recognizing the limitations you just expressed. But as somebody who lives along the Central Corridor, I'm a direct beneficiary of the bus route changes that were made at the same time that Central Corridor was made. So I know it can make a big difference, and the city is going to make a strong case throughout that process for access to all those stations.
Yeah, and to put a further point on that, Councilmember Yang, to Guinness's point, we've strongly zeroed in on the connection issue. As a matter of fact, the driving lenses that we had, of course, we had the in-project focus, which was enumerated by staff and others. We had, of course, the equity considerations that Councilmember Glidden touched on, and certainly were a driving component of how we've engaged to date. And then the other component, a lens that's very, important to the city of Minneapolis when we talk about any mode of transit or any transit project. It's not a project in isolation. It's a project that goes into a system. We have a stated policy around our systems, Access Minneapolis, and it's always our framework that we start with and end with when we review projects and advocate for improvements. As a matter of fact, when we talked about this line in the system context, we were very mindful of the potential strengths of the Botno line and the interconnections between the two, and how that could be a very critical and important advancement for the transportation needs of North Minneapolis. And as a matter of fact, it's that context where I think there's the strongest promise and work to be done. And with that, there's certainly going to be more to the project that needs to be described. There's a lot of information out there. Folks have been advised to take advantage of the information that's on the websites. I strongly encourage people to come to the evening meeting, which I'll take an action to extend this meeting into that. I believe, Director Cockey, did you have a comment?
I did. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make sure, to clarify and maybe not make sure we don't have a misunderstanding on a particular item that Councilmember Gordon had asked regarding the channel. And so what I'd like to, maybe I'll just read from item 2 out of Exhibit 1 on, I guess, the city's position. So the tunnel north of the water channel will be removed and a station will be added at the 21st Street. The 21st Street station will include pedestrian connections to the Cedar Lake. Light rail trains will operate at grade on a bridge over the Kenilworth Channel and at grade north of the channel. So that is the language that we have in the MOU. So I just want to make sure there isn't any misunderstanding. And I have had a chance to talk to Superintendent Jane Miller this morning and outline these issues that impacted the park board as well, so they're aware of these.
Thank you for that clarification. With that, I will adjourn this meeting, and this meeting will adjourn to 7 p.m. tonight at Ann Watton Middle School, 256 Upton Avenue South, to receive a briefing and provide an opportunity for public comment on the Southwest Light Rail Transit Project. And I invite all to attend and participate in that. And so we are hereby adjourned to that session. Thank you very much. That should be on ours.